We call it Mexico City. But long before that name existed, before Spanish cathedrals rose above the valley, before colonial maps redrawed the world, this place was something else entirely. It was Tenochtitlan. And beneath the asphalt and metro lines, beneath the modern sprawl of 20 million people, the bones of one of history's greatest cities still rest, silent and mostly forgotten. Here is what they don't tell you. When Spanish conquistadors first saw Tenochtitlan in 1519, it was larger than Paris, cleaner than London, and more sophisticated than almost any European city of its time. But that version of history doesn't fit the narrative we inherited. So it was buried, literally and figuratively. Most people, if they know the name Tenochtitlan at all, know it as the Aztec capital, a city conquered by Hernán Cortés, destroyed in battle, and replaced by the colonial order. That version is not wrong, but it is incomplete. It reduces a civilization to its ending. It defines a people by their defeat. And it erases the fact that Tenochtitlan was not just a city. It was a vision, an engineering marvel, a center of art, governance, astronomy, and trade that had taken over 2 centuries to build. To understand what was lost, you have to go back, not to the conquest, but to the beginning, to the moment when a wandering people, following a prophecy, arrived at the edge of a shallow lake and saw an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. That was the sign. That was the place. And on that marshy, uninhabitable land, they began to build. The year is 1325. The location? A series of small islands in Lake Texcoco in the Valley of Mexico, a highland basin surrounded by volcanic peaks, fed by freshwater springs, dotted with other lakeside cities already flourishing under different rulers. The Mexica, the people we now call Aztecs, were not the first here. They were latecomers, outsiders, looked down upon by the established powers around the lake. But they had ambition, and they had knowledge. They began to expand their islands, not by conquest at first, but by construction. They built chinampas, artificial floating gardens, anchored to the lake bed with wooden stakes and woven reeds, layered with mud and vegetation until they became solid ground. These chinampas were not primitive. They were hyper-efficient agricultural platforms capable of producing multiple harvests per year, feeding a population that would eventually reach 200,000 people within this city alone. Imagine standing at the edge of the island in the early 1400s. The city is growing. Canals cut through the streets like veins, carrying canoes loaded with goods, cacao from the coast, jade from the south, obsidian from the mountains. Causeways stretch across the water, connecting Tenochtitlan to the mainland. Aqueducts bring fresh drinking water from distant springs. This is not a city stumbling towards civilization. This is a city engineering its own existence from water and earth. By the time the Spanish arrived in 1519, Tenochtitlan had become the capital of an empire. The city itself was divided into 4 quadrants, radiating from the Templo Mayor, the Great Temple, at its sacred center. Each quadrant had its own administrative center, its own markets, its own neighborhoods organized by craft and occupation. Walk through the Tlatelolco market on a busy day, and you would find more than 60,000 people trading goods from across Mesoamerica. Feathers from tropical birds, turquoise from the north, cotton cloth, pottery, medicinal herbs, live animals, gold worked into intricate jewelry. The Mexica did not use currency as we understand it. They used cacao beans, copper axes, and quachli, standardized cotton cloaks as units of exchange. But the sophistication of their economy rivaled anything in Europe. They kept written records, not in an alphabet, but in a complex system of glyphs that recorded history, tribute, astronomy, and law. Scribes trained for years to master this system. Knowledge was preserved in codices, painted books made from bark paper or deerskin, folded accordion style, and at the center of it all stood the Templo Mayor, a massive pyramid temple rising over 60 meters into the sky, dedicated to two gods, Huitzilopochtli, the god of war, and the sun, and Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. This was not decoration. This was the axis of the world, the place where the sacred and the political intersected, where rulers were crowned, where captives were sacrificed, where the cosmos was honored and the city's power was legitimized. To stand in the plaza before the Templo Mayor was to stand at the center of the universe, at least as the Mexica understood it. But here is the human detail we often miss. Imagine a young woman in the early 1500s making her way through the streets of Tenochtitlan at dawn. She is from a merchant family. Her father trades in cacao and feathers. She wears a hupil, an embroidered tunic dyed with cochineal, a red pigment extracted from insects so valuable it will eventually rival gold in the eyes of European traders. She crosses a canal on a wooden bridge, watching canoes pass below. She stops at a neighborhood shrine, one of hundreds scattered throughout the city, and leaves an offering of copal incense. The smoke rises, carrying prayers upward. She does not know it, but within 2 years, everything she knows will be gone. The canals will be filled in. The temples will be demolished. Their stones used to build churches. The language she speaks, Nahuatl, will be suppressed, though it will never fully disappear. The gods she honors will be forbidden, but in this moment, she is simply walking through her city, which feels permanent, eternal, unshakable. History does not feel like history. When you are living it, it feels like Tuesday. The turning point came in November 1519, when Hernán Cortés and his small force of Spanish soldiers, along with thousands of indigenous allies, entered Tenochtitlan. The Mexica Emperor, Moctezuma II, received them, not with hostility, at least not at first, but with caution, diplomacy, perhaps curiosity. The Spanish were astonished. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a soldier who documented the expedition, wrote that when they saw the city from the causeway, they wondered if it was real or a dream. The scale, the order, the beauty. But astonishment quickly gave way to greed. What followed was not a single battle, but a prolonged, brutal siege. Disease, smallpox, spread through the city, killing thousands. Political alliances fractured. Rival indigenous nations, resentful of Mexica dominance, joined the Spanish. And in August 1521, after months of fighting, starvation, and death, Tenochtitlan fell. The Spanish did not occupy the city. They destroyed it. Systematically, the temples were razed, the canals were filled, the palaces were dismantled, the books were burned, and on top of the ruins, they built a new city, a colonial city, a Spanish city. But they could not erase everything. Here is what we rarely acknowledge. The destruction of Tenochtitlan was not just military, it was symbolic. To erase a city is to erase memory. To destroy its temples is to delegitimize its gods. To fill its canals is to rewrite its geography. To burn its books is to silence its history. The Spanish needed Tenochtitlan to disappear, not just physically, but conceptually. Because if people remembered how advanced it was, how organized, how beautiful, it would complicate the narrative of civilizing a savage land. So, the story was simplified. The Aztecs became a footnote, remembered mostly for human sacrifice and conquest, reduced to a convenient villains-turned-victims arc that justified colonization. The city itself was buried, and for centuries, it stayed that way. But cities do not disappear completely. They leave traces. In 1978, electrical workers digging near the Zocalo, the main plaza of Mexico City, struck something hard. It was a massive stone disc, over 3 meters in diameter, carved with the image of Cahokia, the Mexica moon goddess, dismembered and defeated. This was not just art, it was a fragment of the Templo Mayor itself, buried beneath centuries of colonial construction. The discovery triggered one of the most significant archaeological projects in Mexican history. Excavations revealed the foundations of the Great Temple, layers upon layers of construction, offerings buried in ritual caches, jade, obsidian, shells, the bones of jaguars and eagles. Today, the Templo Mayor site sits in the heart of Mexico City, surrounded by colonial buildings, a startling reminder that two civilizations occupy the same ground. Walk through the museum there, and you can see the objects the Mexica considered sacred. The tools, the jewelry, the sculptures. You can stand where priests once stood. You can see the layers of history literally stacked on top of each other. And if you look closely at the street names, at the language still spoken in markets, at the food sold by vendors, tamales, atole, chapulines, you realize that Tenochtitlan never fully disappeared. It was buried, but it was not erased. We call it Mexico City. But now you know, it was never just that. It was Tenochtitlan first, a city built on water, sustained by ingenuity, destroyed by conquest, and buried beneath the weight of empire. And beneath the noise of the modern city, beneath the metro and the traffic, the memory of that other city still rests, waiting for those willing to look down and remember. If this changed how you see history, if you realize that conquest does not mean erasure, that destruction does not mean disappearance, then this is only the beginning. Subscribe to Before America, where the story starts before the maps, and the past is never as simple as we were taught.